Have you ever wondered why the woman who cried in your arms, the one who called you her rock, the one who told you she finally felt safe, suddenly disappeared when you gave her everything she said she wanted? You didn't cheat, you didn't lie, you didn't disappear when she needed you. You were consistent, you were kind, you stayed when others left, you listened when others dismissed, and still, she drifted, or worse, she turned cold, distant, even cruel. You sit there wondering what crime you committed, and the only answer you find is this silent, invisible judgment. You were too good. But what does that even mean? You see her now with someone else, a man who barely acknowledges her texts, who flirts with other women in front of her, who makes her feel uncertain, even anxious, and yet she chases him. She waits for his approval. She dresses up hoping he'll notice. She smiles more at a man who gives her less. And you can't make sense of it, because deep down, you believed that goodness was the path. You believed that if you were calm, patient, reliable, love would last. It doesn't. Not always. Not in the world we live in now. Modern dating doesn't punish bad men. It punishes men who make women feel too secure, too early. That's the bitter truth. When you give everything up front, your attention, your effort, your loyalty, you strip away the very tension that fuels her attraction. You become predictable, and predictability, for some women, equals emotional boredom. No one tells you this. They just say, be yourself, be a good man, do the right thing. But they leave out the other half, that the right thing, in theory, often kills desire in practice. Because when a woman feels she has you completely, when she senses no challenge, no uncertainty, no mystery, her instincts shift. And those same instincts that were once drawn to your steadiness now crave something else, the unpredictable, the unavailable, the emotionally distant. It's not logical, it's not moral, but it's real. Most men learn this the hard way, not from a textbook, not from advice, but from sitting alone in a quiet room, replaying every moment, asking themselves, how did I lose someone I treated so well? You replay the late night calls, the reassurances, the apologies for things you didn't even do, all in the name of love. But love, without polarity, dies. That's what you were never taught, and by the time you realize it, you're already bleeding emotionally, because good men, truly good men, feel everything deeply, and when they love fully. But here's what you need to understand. Not all women are wired the same, but the ones who chase chaos, who confuse comfort with weakness, who mistake kindness for naivety, they will always walk away from you. Not because you weren't enough, but because you made them feel too much like themselves, too seen, too safe. And that safety, for women addicted to emotional drama, feels like suffocation. This doesn't mean you should become cruel. It doesn't mean you should play games or pretend to be someone you're not. But it does mean you must stop bleeding your soul dry just to prove you're worthy of staying. Some women are not rejecting you. They're rejecting the reflection they see in your calm, because your love forces them to confront their own instability. And rather than rise into that space with you, they run. They return to the roller coaster, to the guy who texts wide at 2 a.m., to the man who doesn't ask about her day because his distance keeps her chasing. And the chase, not the connection, is what she's addicted to. So you're left feeling like the villain, like maybe you were too needy, like maybe you should have held back. But here's the twisted part: the very behaviors you use to nurture her, to support her, to make her feel valued, are the same ones she interpreted as weakness. Not because they are weak, but because she wasn't ready to receive love without pain attached to it. If a woman only associates love with unpredictability and emotional risk, then she will reject anything that feels emotionally mature. You became the mirror. And when a woman looks in that mirror and doesn't recognize herself without the drama, she breaks the glass and blames you for the shards. Now you're bleeding, and she's posting smiling photos, and you don't understand how she moved on so fast. But the truth is, she didn't really move on. She regressed. She returned to a dynamic where she doesn't have to face her own emotional instability, where she doesn't have to grow, where she doesn't have to feel safe, because safety, to her, feels like a cage. And here's what no one tells you: the more secure and stable you are, the more you will expose the emotional wounds of people who never healed. And their instinct will be to flee, not because of who you are, but because of who they're still unwilling to become. You keep thinking, maybe if I had done less, maybe if I had waited longer to show I cared, maybe if I had held back just a little. And that's how it starts, the erosion of your natural instincts, the beginning of self-betrayal. You were told to be kind, so you were. You were told to listen, so you did. You were told to open up, and you let yourself be vulnerable. But now you're learning that in this world, kindness without boundaries is often exploited. Vulnerability without power is often punished. So what happens? You begin to shrink. You second guess. You delay affection. You rehearse every text. You stop speaking your truth just to avoid being too much. You monitor your masculinity like it's a problem to be fixed. Not because you did anything wrong, but because the woman who once leaned into you now recoils at the very warmth she begged for. You tell yourself this is temporary, that she's just going through something, that if you love harder, she'll come back. But deep down, a voice is whispering, and it's not kind. It's the voice of confusion turning into resentment. It's the voice that asks, why does being good hurt so much? You see, what no one prepares you for is this: when you are a man rooted in clarity, devotion, and emotional steadiness, you become a threat to women who are still addicted to emotional instability. Not a threat in a cruel way, but in a way that unsettles the emotional chaos they've learned to rely on. You disrupt the cycles they aren't ready to leave, and because of that, they will find ways to sabotage the connection. It starts small. She withdraws affection. She becomes colder in her tone. She stops initiating. She doesn't say I love you with the same depth, and you feel it, that shift, that pulling away. So you try harder. You become more available. You ask her how she's doing more often. You go out of your way to plan things, to give her space, to say I'm here without needing anything back. But here's the psychological trap when you try to fix her emotional withdrawal with more presence, more kindness, more proving. You teach her that your love is dependent on her inconsistency. You teach her that your identity bends around her mood swings, and the more you give when she withholds, the more she confirms that she doesn't need to reciprocate. Because you're always there, always waiting, always ready to clean up the emotional mess. Even if she made it, that dynamic creates a brutal power imbalance. And she may not even realize she's doing it. But her subconscious learns that distance gets rewarded. That emotional unavailability gives her control. That your goodness has no spine. And eventually, she loses respect. That's the part that breaks most men. Because it's not just rejection, it's the silent disrespect that grows like mold behind polite smiles and neutral tones. She may not yell, she may not insult, but her indifference will scream louder than any words. She'll stop asking how your day was. She'll stop noticing your effort. She'll forget the things that once made her grateful. And yet, you stay, because you think that leaving would make you just like the others. And you're not like the others. But here's the truth: staying in a place where your emotional value is no longer recognized is not loyalty. It's self-abandonment. You can be a good man, but if your goodness requires you to tolerate emotional starvation, it's no longer goodness, it's martyrdom, and no one will thank you for it. In fact, the longer you stay in that dynamic, the more invisible you become. You'll shrink inside your own relationship, wondering why love feels like walking on eggshells. And the worst part, she'll tell her friends you were too sensitive, too available, too intense, as if the depth of your heart was a burden she couldn't carry. But what she won't say is that she never told you she was incapable of emotional intimacy, that she never warned you she only knew love as chaos, that she never said she was still haunted by a father who didn't stay, and so she never learned how to stay either. You were punished for showing up, and she was rewarded for being emotionally absent. So now, you're learning the hard lesson: women don't fall for effort alone, they fall for emotional contrast. And when a man gives too much, too soon, without anchoring himself in self-worth, he becomes background noise, familiar, predictable. And for women wired for emotional spikes, that's death to attraction. This is not your fault, but it is your responsibility now. Because the moment you understand this, you can never go back to being naive. You can never again confuse being needed with being respected. You can never again let your kindness be used as currency to keep a broken dynamic alive. You start to realize that being good isn't enough, not in the way you thought. Not if your version of good means silencing your own needs to serve hers. Not if it means tolerating emotional neglect just because you fear being abandoned. That isn't love. That's conditioning. And most men were conditioned to equate self-worth with sacrifice, to stay longer than they should, to believe that if they just keep showing up, keep giving, keep loving, she'll finally see their value. But here's the ugly truth you've been avoiding: she already saw your value. That's why she chose you. And that's also why she tested how much of yourself you were willing to give up just to keep her. Because in modern relationships, especially the ones built on insecure attachment power, gets measured not by who loves more, but by who needs less. When you make her the emotional center of your world, when your entire self-esteem rises and falls with her approval, you become reactive, you become controllable, and she will test it, sometimes consciously, sometimes without even realizing what she's doing. She'll push, she'll pull away, she'll go quiet, she'll change the rules halfway through, not to hurt you, but to see if your love comes with limits. And when she learns that it doesn't, when she sees that you'll compromise anything just to hold on to her, she stops respecting you. Women don't stay where they lose respect, even if you're nice, even if you're dependable, even if you're good. Because respect comes before love. And the moment she senses that you don't respect yourself, she can't respect you either. That's the part that cuts deepest. You thought consistency would win her over. You thought being reliable would separate you from the rest. And in the beginning, it did. But what you didn't realize is that emotional safety, without masculine boundary, turns into emotional dullness in her eyes. That's why the man who doesn't chase, who says no without explaining, who holds his frame when she tests him, triggers something in her that you never could. Not because he's better, not because he's more attractive, but because he makes her feel something unpredictable, something she can't control, something she starts chasing. That's what you need to understand. Some women crave emotional uncertainty more than stability, because unpredictability feels like passion. It mimics the high of love, even if it's toxic. And when you come along with genuine affection, emotional maturity, and a steady presence, it doesn't register the same way in her nervous system. It doesn't light up the survival-based circuits she's used to. So she misinterprets your goodness as weakness. And you start internalizing that. You start wondering if maybe you were too much. Maybe you shouldn't have opened up. Maybe you were too available. But no. The problem isn't your depth. The problem is giving it to someone who can't breathe unless she's drowning. This is why so many good men walk away from relationships feeling confused, angry, and hollow, because they weren't met with cruelty. They were met with emotional neglect that was masked as normal. Slow fades, lukewarm affection, dry responses, dead eyes during conversations, and worst of all, the burden of being blamed for it. She'll say, "I just need space. You're overwhelming me. I don't know what I want anymore." But she'll never admit what's really happening, that your love revealed how emotionally unavailable she really is. And instead of facing it, she pulls back. Because facing it means growing, and not everyone wants to grow. Some just want to feel what they've always felt, even if it hurts. So now you're here, angry, tired, guarded. You find yourself hesitating in new connections. You play it cool. You don't text first. You don't reveal too much. Not because it's who you are, but because it's who you've become. A man who no longer trusts that goodness is enough. A man who confuses emotional silence with strength. A man who now wears armor even in rooms where no one is aiming at him. And that's the tragedy. Because when good men get hurt enough, they stop being good. Not to others, but to themselves. You bury your softness. You turn affection into calculation. You study what works instead of being who you are. And somewhere along the line, you forget what it felt like to give without fear, to love without games, to trust without checking her phone, to hold a woman without waiting for her to disappear. But it's not too late. The key isn't to become cold, it's to become clear. You don't need to dim your light. You need to stop shining it where it's never reflected back. You don't need to stop caring. You need to stop caring for people who drain you. You don't need to close your heart. You need to guard it with standards, not silence. Because love without respect will always lead to pain. And respect begins with you. You want to know what changes everything one moment. That one quiet moment when you stop asking what she thinks of you and start asking what you think of her. It's a moment most men never reach, because we're trained from a young age to seek approval, to win affection, to prove our worth. You were taught to measure your masculinity by how much you could give, how much you could endure, how much you could tolerate before finally snapping. But strength isn't how much pain you can take. Strength is how quickly you walk away when that pain becomes the standard. And here's the hardest part to swallow. A lot of women don't want a good man. They want a man who is good for them, which isn't the same thing. A man who's good for her ego, good for her image, good for her short-term needs. But the moment your emotional depth becomes inconvenient, the moment your honesty pierces the game, the moment your presence demands accountability instead of chaos, she begins to pull away. You stop being fun. You stop being exciting. You stop being the one she can control. And because control made her feel safe, not connection, she panics. She'll say you changed, that you're being too intense or too emotional. But she won't say the truth, that your depth scares her, that your presence exposes her instability, that your goodness makes her feel guilty for not being able to match it. So she turns cold. She rewrites the story. You become too much. Even though you never asked for more than mutual respect. You become the problem. Even though you never stopped loving. You become needy because you wanted emotional reciprocity. And in the silence she leaves behind, you question yourself, not realizing she left because she couldn't bear to face herself. That's the game. Not because women are evil, not because they're manipulative, but because some women haven't done the inner work. And your steadiness threatens the survival patterns they built their identity around. You're not the first man she's done this to, and you won't be the last. But you might be the one who wakes up, because the truth is this: women only value what they respect. And respect is not earned through sacrifice. It's earned through self-possession, through boundary, through the quiet confidence of a man who doesn't need her validation to feel whole. You see, you thought being good meant saying yes, but sometimes being good means walking away. It means not replying. It means ending the date early when she's being disrespectful. It means not giving her the benefit of the doubt when the pattern keeps repeating. It means protecting your peace, even when your heart wants to stay. This is the part most men never learn, because it feels unnatural. You were told to be patient, to be kind, to wait it out, to fix it. But that kind of man, the one who tolerates emotional negligence in the name of love, becomes a shell. He becomes bitter, he becomes cynical, and worst of all, he begins to distrust his own kindness. You've probably already felt it. The urge to withhold now, to mirror her coldness, to become what they chase, not what they run from. But if you're not careful, you'll lose yourself trying to become the kind of man the wrong woman won't leave. And that's a game you can't win. Because when you perform emotional distance just to be wanted, you're still operating from need. You're still chasing approval, only this time through manipulation. And the moment you start pretending not to care is the moment you start losing your core. So, what's the answer? You stop trying to be the man she wants. You become the man who no longer tolerates inconsistency, flakiness, emotional immaturity, passive aggression, or hot and cold behavior, no matter how beautiful she is, no matter how much chemistry you feel, no matter how lonely you are. You learn to walk away the first time your soul feels violated. You learn to say no, not with anger, but with clarity. You learn to say, "This isn't what I want," and mean it, even when your heart is begging you to stay. Because the most attractive trait in any man isn't his ability to chase, it's his ability to choose himself over chaos, to choose his peace over the thrill of emotional gambling, to choose solitude over disrespect. And once you do that, once you stop bending to earn what should be freely given, everything changes. You stop attracting women who test your worth. You stop chasing women who don't see your value. You stop being drawn to the thrill of winning someone emotionally unavailable. And instead, you begin to feel what respect actually looks like. It's quiet, it's consistent, it doesn't leave you guessing, and most of all, it feels like home, not a battlefield. Now you know. You know why being the good guy left you hurt. You know why your loyalty was met with distance, why your softness was mistaken for weakness, why your emotional presence didn't earn the closeness you deserved. It triggered something in her she didn't know how to process. You saw her cry in your arms, and you thought it meant she was open. You listened to her talk about past traumas, and you thought it meant she was ready to heal. You offered her the very thing she said she always wanted: safety, support, stability, and then you watched her vanish. Not always physically, but emotionally. The laughter faded. The eye contact stopped. The little things you did suddenly became invisible, and when you asked why she didn't know, or worse, she blamed you. But here's what no one teaches you. Some people are not ready to be loved in a healthy way. They only know how to feel when they're being rejected. They only feel alive in the tension of not knowing. They chase the high of inconsistency not because they're cruel, but because their nervous system has been wired to equate love with chaos. You weren't just fighting for her affection, you were fighting against her history, her conditioning, her trauma, and you didn't even know it. So no, your love didn't fail. It just landed in a place that wasn't ready to receive it. The work now is not about blaming her. The work is about rebuilding yourself from the ground up, not to become cold, not to become manipulative, but to become so grounded in your own emotional reality that you no longer break just because someone couldn't see you. You stop being the man who waits, the man who begs, The man who sends paragraphs trying to explain what should have been obvious. You stop asking questions when silence is the answer. You stop trying to teach women how to love you when they're still at war with themselves. You reclaim your time. You reclaim your presence. You reclaim your energy. Because that's what was truly taken from you, not your money, not your body, not your words, your energy, your mental clarity, your emotional bandwidth, your peace. You were drained trying to fix something that was never in your control to begin with. Now, your job is simple: never let it happen again. You draw lines, you listen to your instincts, you protect your softness, not by hiding it, but by filtering who gets access to it. You recognize that love is not a reward for suffering. It's not something you earn by tolerating someone's emotional chaos. It's either mutual or it's manipulation. You stop seeing women as puzzles to solve. You start seeing them as mirrors. If what you see reflects peace, openness, consistency, you move toward it. If it reflects confusion, hot and cold behavior, emotional evasion, you walk away. Not with anger, not with revenge, with stillness. Because now you understand real power isn't in making her stay. It's in knowing when to leave. You stop needing closure. You stop needing to be understood. You stop trying to get the last word. Instead, you let your absence be the last word. Because a man who respects himself does not chase what is not being offered freely. You rise out of the ashes of heartbreak with a new rulebook, one written not by society, not by relationship coaches, but by experience, by the gut-level pain that taught you what logic never could. And from now on, you play a different game. You don't chase, you attract. You don't prove, you choose. You don't give endlessly, you invest selectively. You don't fix broken patterns, you exit broken rooms. And most of all, you stop trying to be the good man for everyone. You become the right man for yourself. The man who no longer confuses love with sacrifice. The man who no longer tolerates inconsistency just because he's afraid to be alone. The man who holds his peace higher than her presence. She didn't break you. She revealed what you were too afraid to protect.